I will kick off. For those of you that I haven't met before, my name's Talitha Acton and I'm one of the farming advisors for Soil Association. I'm joined this evening by Kate Still, who is the head of the farming team, and James Johnson, who is a farmer that's local to me, but has done quite a lot of changes with their system over the last few years. So he's going to talk a little bit about that. So in terms of how the evening is going to go, we'll kick off with James' case study and how they're farming now and what they've changed. We'll then work through a little bit about soils, about grazing systems, and about support schemes. So we're going to go into a bit more detail. It's going to include a bit of monitoring and a bit of kind of adjustments that you can make around various things. Please do ask questions as we go, and we'll finish off just with what events we're going to be there at over the rest of the year, particularly around sheep. But that's that. So James, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay.
And yeah, crack on.
Great. Well, I'm James Johnson. I farm up in Northumberland. We farm over 3 holdings in the Tyne Valley. And yeah, we'll get into that as we go on. If you go to the next slide, Tabitha. Just a brief bit of plan of what I'm going through, just a bit of an introduction, a bit of science behind what we're doing and how or why it works, how we've changed the grazing plan, followed by a change of sheep breeds and a change of cattle breeds. So fairly straightforward, nothing too complicated. So I went to Haydenbridge High School, just a local rural school in Northumberland. During my A-levels, we got taken out by, half the farm got taken out with foot and mouth, so I decided to go off to university. Did geography and sports studies at university. In 2005, I came back to the farm, but did a bit of rugby coaching alongside. West Walmley's 400 acres with 150-acre FBT next door, so not really big enough for both me and my dad. So I went, and my brother came back as well. So I went off and did a bit of coaching on the side. And then 2007, my dad very kindly said, right, you're in charge of the sheep from now on. Which was fair enough. So we started buying high EBV tups. We did a bit of an experiment, went to Carlisle and bought 3 tup lambs. We bought a great big tup lamb that we had the best figures in the breed at the sale. We bought a lovely looking tup lamb that had no EBVs, and the one that was in the top 10% of the breed that we quite like the look of. The great big monster of a tup lamb bred great big ugly lambs that weren't really suited to what we were after. The little shapy tup that without any figures bred lovely little shapy lambs but didn't have the growth rates we're after, and the one that was in the top 10% of the breed and we like the look of had a good crop of lambs that we had all the growth rates we're after as well as looking right. So for the next 15 years we have been buying tups that we like the look of, that are in the top 10% of the breed, Texels and Suffolks, and breeding away from there. In 2008 all my coaching funding was cut, just because coincided with the recession, but we also had the chance to take over another farm, 250 acres, so it meant we had a bit more flexibility so I could come back to work at home full time. 2016 I got my own tenancy of a farm just up the valley from my parents, so it's another 277 acres, not from the National Trust, and it included a high level stewardship, and I was just running Northampton mules to a Suffolk tup to have a nice easy lambing and good fast growing lambs that we were selling away dead weight. In 2016 we had a bad calving back at my parents, so decided we need to change something. The workforce was aging and me and my brother were split between 2 holdings, and invariably there was a problem when one of us was busy at a different holding, so it didn't really lend itself to producing show calves with tricky calvings. So we've had Charolais bulls for a long time and been breeding pedigree Charolais bulls. So we've been putting high figured bulls over the heifers for a nice easy calving and then having a saleable bull to sell. So we bred a bull by one of the top figured bulls in the breed, so we decided we would just put that over the cows. That first year he went to 28 cows, 27 calved themselves completely unassisted, and the one that needed help was about 10:30 at night and wanted to go to bed. And we thought this could actually be the way forward, and then when we came out to sell them, his calves averaged more than the show calves, and there was no vet's bills to go with them. So we thought this possibly is something we should be looking at a bit harder. And again, to try and make life a bit easier, in 2018 we looked at a maternal. 2017 we looked at a maternal Texel tup. My dad tried to buy one that didn't get delivered, so the next year we went to a sale and bought one out of the sale. In 2021 I was asked by Innovis to start breeding Primera Yows, and Abatex has fought Innovis to sell the tups for me. In 2022 we started a new high-level stewardship, put a lot of GS4 legume and Herbert swords in. 2023 I was voted in as chairman of the Thumberland Farmer Network. Okay, Tabitha? So whilst away at university, learned quite a bit about desertification, so the loss of organic matter out of your soils, which is causing the spread of the deserts around the world, and leading to things like the Dust Bowl in America. In 2016, the National Trust held a learning day to try and increase organic matter into arable rotations to increase your soil fertility, and look at trying to reduce your inputs into arable rotations, which wasn't exactly relevant to the grass farm that I had, but it was quite interesting. So I started doing a bit of reading behind it, got into Alan Savory, Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, who are part of the Regenerate Outcomes team. And then we started looking at other sheep breeds that would be suited to mob grazing, suited to the GS4 crops that we put in. We put a field in, we put 3 fields in 2015-16, and just grazed them normally. And within the first year, we'd lost all the legumes and herbs out of them. So we had to do a bit more reading behind them, which kind of led to the rotation and longer breaks and longer rest periods in between. And back 2018, I tried to buy bought an Innovis tup, and I decided to move away from crossing Leicesters. It's a long story behind that, but we'll skip over that for today. So I bought 30 Aberfield cross Blackie Yow lambs, and then the following year I got 40 shearlings and 30 more 3/4 Aberfields just to see how they got on. And they lambed away quite well, good growth rates on the lambs, but the biggest factor for us was in 2018 my dad had a double knee replacement. 2 years later he lambed all the Aberfield cross Yows outside by himself. And he needed help with one sheep to lamb it, just because it was being a bit wild. So I thought this is possibly the way we should be looking at to go forward. Okay, Tabitha. So 10 years ago we were producing show calves, pedigree Charolais bulls and show calves. So the top 2 pictures there are the bulls that we're producing to go to Carlisle. The bottom 3 are all show calves we're taken to Hexham to the Belgium sale. We did quite well with prizes, had a lot of good fun showing cattle. It seemed to me it was a nice hobby to have, but it was just a hobby. We weren't making a great deal of money doing it, and calving was tricky. We had a bull that produced show calves, but it did come with difficult calving periods as part of that. So we decided we need to have a little change away from it. So producing slightly less shapy calves, but hopefully having a bit easier time at calving. Okay, Tabitha. So I think everyone's aware of how plants grow. They take sunlight and a bit of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They then produce sugars, which are transferred down to the roots to be stored. Litter falls off the plant and lands on the soil, adding to your carbon, and the plant will take up some minerals and water from the soil, and then send those back up to the leaves to help them grow. Okay, Tabitha. What a lot of people don't understand is the plants will take up a lot of minerals. They'll form a symbiotic relationship with the soil microorganisms. They will exchange carbon from the atmosphere with the organisms in the soil, and in exchange they'll get the necessary minerals that they require to grow. And the problem is, as soon as we start putting fertilizer on the soil, we start interfering with that relationship. So it has a negative impact on the plant growing. So if you go to the next slide, Tabitha. So it's been discovered that so the top line shows the plant stages. The first one is a full-grown plant, then it's either grazed or cut, and then over the next 4 days, it takes for the plant to tell the roots it needs the energy back up from the roots to help grow. So if you look at the rootstock on that picture, in the first and second picture, the rootstocks are about the same, but as that plant starts to grow again, the energy and sugars in the rootstock is sent back up to the leaves, so the rootstock reduces in size. And then as it grows back up to full size, then it starts putting the energy back down into the rootstock, which then allows that plant to grow its roots, looking for more nutrients and water from lower down in the soil profile. Okay, top of that. So this is a traditional ryegrass Timothy white clover layer that we've been putting in for years. The root depth goes down to about 30 centimeters, I think it is, in the soil, so fairly close to the surface still. It has an excellent surface network to obtain the fertilizer that you'd be putting on. It's ideal for that, for utilizing the fertilizer added to the soil, but they are suited to fertilizer. So when we've been putting GS4 legume and herb rich swards in, they come with a much greater variation of plants. Okay, Tabitha. So this is the GS4 pack that we've been putting in, and there's a lot of ryegrass, cocksfoot, timothy, meadow fescues, and red clovers. But then we get down to legume and herbs with the more chicory, plantains, and white clover, right the way through, which gives us a good variation in a good diversity of plants on the surface, but also a good diversity in the root depths. So if you go to the next page, Tabitha, this is the layer that we've been putting in, and you can see, looking at the chicory and the plantain or ribgrass, those roots are going down to 160, 170 centimeters, so 5 or 6 times the depth that the ryegrass, white clover, and timothy are doing. A good range of grasses and plants on the surface as well, so there's good diversity for the plants for the animals to eat. And although we're not spoilt with, you can keep going, Tabitha, that's fine. We're not spoiled with a good soil depth. This shows the soil depth that the roots can take if we allow them to go down that far. The left-hand side picture is just a good one of a child. These are both American pictures, so don't think that this is happening up in Northumberland. But again, that first one is an unbelievable root depth, small child shown just to show the depth that it can get to. And the third one shows the difference between the root depth of natural native grasses compared to the agriculture and corn grown next to them. So they are very different root structures, and in that soil profile, there's not a lot splitting those up. Okay, Tabitha. So we decided to have a change of direction. These are the GS4 and legume herb rich swards. So not your normal ryegrass and clover mix. There's a good mix of broadleaf plants, a lot of flowers, and yeah, just a good variation for the plants. We did discover if the sheep manage to break through an electric fence, they will take out all the broadleaf plants first and leave the grass behind. We did a brilliant walk a couple of years ago, where the people who were hosting the walk for us came and had a look around and were very impressed with the different plants we were growing. And the day before the farm walk, the sheep got through the fence and all they left behind them was a field of grass. So it wasn't exactly what the farm walk was after, but it did show the sheep will eat the broadleaf plants rather than the grasses if they get the opportunities to. So a lot of people will discuss and say that the sheep need to be on kind of 10 centimeter grazings. So these ones here are looking at a good 12 inches of forage. Some of the broadleaf plants here are standing up to 2 feet tall. This is probably after about a 45, 50-day break in the crop. And these are just the lambs that have come into the field. When the lambs are grazing this, we averaged over the entire flock 300 grams a day, so 2.1 kilograms a week, which I thought was quite an acceptable growth rate we should have been getting off forage reared sheep. So these have never had any supplementary feeding. And if you go to the next slide, Tabitha, so you can see on the left-hand side of that, the top 2 pictures, that's the height of the sward the sheep were going into, and the right-hand side is the the sward that was left after the grazing. It's quite a noticeable change. We're probably looking at taking more than the 50% that some people talk about as an amount to leave. But because we're given such a long rest period in between the grazings, the plants do seem to recover very quickly. And we've still got, we're on year 3 now, we've still got a good range of the legumes and herbs throughout the sward. Okay, Tabitha? So when we're running sheep and mules at Warmley, we were needing about 1 kilo of feed a day at lambing. I had about 550 ewes, so it's costing us about £150 a day in feed at lambing, plus the silage and bedding for the indoor lambing. It was quite intensive. The Aberfields and Highlanders are currently getting no feed other than forage. They're going across GS4 mixes, but also permanent pastures through the winter. And we're trying to not give them any extra feed whatsoever. And we probably haven't fed concentrates for about 10 or 12 years now. And for the last 5 years, they've just been on forage, no silage or anything. Yeah, the mules were weaning lambs about 180%. Highlanders and Aberfields are slightly less, about 175. We used to have about 90 pet lambs. I was just saying to Tabitha before the meeting started, I think we've got 12 or 15 in the pet lamb pen now. We've never made any money on pets, so we just try and lose as little money as possible on them. But after lambing, the last thing you want to go and do is just get rid of your pets after you've put all the hard work into them and all the expense. So we try and get as much out of them as we can. Yeah, the lambs are generally going away relatively same age, but they seem to fatten easier without any feed. So now we'll have about 100 lambs left at Christmas. Whereas some years with the mules and traditional Texels, we had about 300 left at Christmas in some years, by which point they would all be on feed, which was quite an expensive carry on as well. Okay, Tabitha? So there's a few interesting stats that I picked up over the years. Everyone would love a 200% lambing, no single or triplets, just everything has a pair and everything goes away healthy. That's not particularly realistic, and anything over, I think it's 185%. Once you increase, you don't actually increase your number of pairs. All you're doing is changing your single percentage up to triplet percentage. And I think everyone's aware that the triplet percentage normally just comes with the problems. Singles and pairs seem to manage quite well, but you normally get your twin lamb and your problem births with your multiples. I was at a meeting with Darry Jones at Innovis, and he was saying that the prolificacy, so if you do just buy a herd of pairs in, the offspring, it's only 7% heritable. They'll carry on with the pairs. But your body condition score is 28% heritable, so it's 4 times more heritable to buy a sheep that will maintain its body condition score through the winter. And I was at a meeting last year with Emily Grant from Forward Consultancy, where the latest research is showing that maybe 0.5 of your body condition score that gets lost over the inland period, your neonatal survival drops by 6%. So if you have very fit ewes at tupping at 4%, at body condition 4, and they put in a hard winter, and by the time they come around to lambing, they're only body condition score of 2.5, there's a good chance you've lost an 18% due to neonatal losses. So I think that's quite a stark fact for the fact that we've been told for years that we should let sheep live off their backs. And it's possibly more relevant that we try and maintain condition rather than get the sheep to live off the condition they've put on in the back end. Okay, Tabitha? So a few interesting, so because I breed Primeers and Texels at Broomhouse at Haltersall in Northumberland, I send a lot of data away to Innovis and they send me back usable information. So I mean, the things that are quite nice is that the percentage vigor that's less than 1%, it's been 0 this last couple of years. So the lamb, these figures are all from 2024. I think everyone will be aware of how wet it was last year, a complete contrast to this year. So I think the interesting bit is the lambs all have a lot of vigor. They're very good at getting on their feet and sucking themselves. The entropium's down to 0, which is quite nice. Again, this is in last year where there was a wet time and the lambs never had any sun on their backs, and were still able to average throughout the entire flock 250 grams a day growth rate in the Primeers, 220 on the Texels, and 236 on the Aber Blacks. Texels and Aber Blacks are still transitioning onto the Innovis genetics, so they still do have a swaying towards the traditional Texels and Suffolks. So I'm accepting of the fact they're a little bit slower in growth rates on forage from that. But the most relevant part in 2024 is that we had a neonatal survival of in the 90%. Now we had a particularly wet year up in Northumberland. I'm well aware it was wet all over the country, but I spoke to a vet who said that most neonatal survivals last year was in the 70%. So I think the fact we had a fairly successful lambing last year, and a lot of it's down to slightly more wool cover on the lambs, so they come out and they're a bit more adapted to survive in the harsher weather. Okay, right, Tabitha. So Broomhouse is a hill farm. It's 30% of the farm's Heather Fell, triple SI, higher tiered stewardship, running down to the banks of the South Tyne River. Innovis claim a 10% assistant rate on high index traditional industry texels over the Abertex ewes, so they buy in a high figured tup to put over the texels to keep the type correct. Last year we achieved 3% assisted, but more relevant was 97% unassisted lambing, and that's with an Abertex over traditional ewes, over traditional pure texel ewes, which I think is quite an achievement. If you told most texel breeders that they would only have to help 3 in every 100, I think most of them would bite your hand off with that one. For the Primeras, Innovis are claiming a 98% unassisted rate. Last year we achieved 99%. So we don't have that many. There's only 120 of them. And we had, I think I helped 2 lambs, which I thought was a fairly remarkable achievement. In 2023, just going back to the growth rates again, just running on GS4s and permanent pastures, no supplementary feeding. And this year we ran out of grass sheep wintering for the grass sheep wintering, so I had to supplement the sheep on sacrifice fields. We only used 46 bales of silage and 6 tons of U-nuts as opposed to the 24 we used to use. So we're saving about 75% in concentrates on the mules that we used to graze. We haven't used any fertilizer on the grazing ground since we took the tenancy in 2016, or on the cutting ground since 2022. And although lambing numbers have dropped from 230 to about 170, this is for the pure ewes at mine as opposed to the commercial ewes back at my parents' farm. We're currently running an extra 60 ewe hogs, which are kept on the farm, as well as 55 tup hogs. So the livestock units that we're carrying without any feed or as much feed or any additional fertilizer additives, we've actually increased livestock units, which I think is quite an interesting amount to be achieving with the restrictions we're putting on there. Okay, top of that. So because we changed the sheep, went for a figure-driven forage reared sheep, we thought, why not try it with cattle? We did a bit of research. Some local farmers had gone on to stabilize the cattle, so I had a look at those. Decided to buy a few and see if they could perform as well as the sheep. There's a local sale at Hexham Mart called the Belgium sale, which is for spring-born calves. In 2023, 4 of the 8 Charolais calves that we were showing and winning prizes without stabilized cattle, which I thought was quite a nice indicator that they could perform and produce good quality calves as well as being easier to handle. This year, we've just done a little bit of figures. We had 153 stabilizer cows put to the Charolais bull, and a few Angus bull, and some stabilizer heifers to stabilizer and Limmy bulls. And then we'll have an enterprise where we'll buy a lot of limmers and heifers in, get them into a health scheme, get them fertility checked, get them vaccinated, and then put them to a Limmy bull and sell them with calves at foot. In the first 3 weeks, we had 90% unassisted. So we had 92 calves in 3 weeks. We had 5 pulls of the rope and 4 pulls of the machine. In the second cycle, it was 60% calved. And again, a 90% unassisted rate. So I think that's quite a stark reminder that cattle can perform, and it's justified the change of the breed to produce an easier calving cow going forward. The plan for the year going ahead is to put stabilizer bull, to have an A herd and a B herd. The A herd will go to stabilizer bulls to produce our females going forward. Anything that's not deemed as breedable or want to keep a female off is going to go to a shower bull to produce store calves to sell at 6 months old. Okay, Tabitha. And then finally, we're getting close to finally, how much feed do you use? The cost of your feed divided by 100, which is a rough price of a lamb. How many less lambs you have to produce to stand still to not be making any more money or costing you any more money in the business. We've proven that on Broomhouse, which is a hill farm, we can save 75% of our feed bill, and on the lowland farm, it's 100% of our bought-in feed that we are saving. Again, same on fertilizer. The cost of fertilizer divided by 100. How many less lambs do you need to produce to make a profit? So flick the next slide, Tabitha. So the feed bill, if you're buying in 20 tons of feed at £315 a ton, that's £6,300, which equates to about 63 lambs, which is a 12.6 reduction in lambing. This is over 500 yows. Yows getting half a kilo a day for 10 weeks. And that is a 12.6% reduction to stand still, to not make any more money, but just be standing where you are due to the savings in fertilizer. Due to the savings in feed. If we then do the same for fertilizer bills, again 20 tons over a 300-400 acre farm, on the HDB price list, that's £380 a ton. Now, it's up to you whether you use that for extra profit or just an easier lambing. But if you want to stand still and just have an easier lambing, so at the end of the year be financially the same as you are now, you could save 27.8% in your lambing reduction. You could have to produce 139 less lambs, and you would still be making as much money as you currently are. Now, I would suggest that would make a lot of people's lambing a lot easier. If this is over 500 yows, 27.8% is 139 lambs. So if you're able to reduce your lambing by 27.8%, it would make your lambing substantially easier. I would suggest if you don't want to reduce your lambs, you can always reduce as many lambs as you are, and that is an extra profit of potentially nearly £14,000. Okay, Tabitha?
Great. Last slide is any questions. Has any? I think we've got some in the Q&A actually, so I'll go straight to that. The first one, what difference do you make between mob grazing and rotational grazing for your system?
Financially, is that on financials or?
I'm not sure. Celine, if you want to, do you want to clarify, clarify a little bit, and I'll ask the next question for now. Did you rotationally graze ewes and lambs to achieve the 300 grams per day growth rate on the GS4?
Yes.
And what was your rotational length? Days on and entry and exit covers sort of thing?
Anything from 35 to 54 days that year. We have left fields for 11 months, but that's putting cattle back onto them, not sheep. The longer you can leave it, the more root depth they'll get, which means the faster they'll come back after they've been grazed.
Right, so I suppose, yeah, it's just highlighting that you're very adaptable with your grazing. You're not saying, well, I have to go back in 3 weeks' time, sort of thing.
No, we did try it one year. The first year we did, where we rotated round just in fields, and went back into the same fields after 21 days, and that just seemed to kill out the legumes and herbs. So it needs to be a longer break than that.
Great. So the confirmation on the mob and the rotational grazing was about practicalities. Kind of what I'm thinking about what the first question was.
I think it was when does rotational grazing become mob grazing, I guess. what stocking, like in terms of your stocking rates, perhaps maybe some details on that, and sward like residuals
and so I was running about 170 yows on 1 hectare, and moving them on every 2 to 3 days because we're on solar panels, so we don't have it doesn't have the same kick as mains. So by giving them a slightly bigger area, they weren't as concentrated and they didn't test the fence quite as frequently. Moving them on, they were going on to, at the start of the season, we'd be on to about 10 centimetre sward height, and we were leaving 4 to 5 centimetres left afterwards. So there was a decent sward or stubble left behind. Didn't want to eat too far into it. There's a bit of research shows that if you graze them too hard and they take off the node of the grass length, it'll stunt the recovery. So we're trying to leave it a little bit longer. So we've got a faster recovery and we can get back into it that little bit quicker.
Fab, thank you. So this question, I think we'll answer more generally as we go through. It's kind of partly what the webinar is about. But in terms of what was the first thing you guys did? So you talked a lot about kind of what triggered the changes in terms of the kind of the production system and stuff, but what did you change first?
We went into stewardship, and one of the financial changes was we could put GS4 crops in, legume and herbiage swards, and get paid quite well for that, which was the first year we went in and did 21-day grazings and killed them. So then we had to do a bit more research and a bit more experimenting, which came back with greater rest length in between. Okay. So it was a financial reward for putting GS4 crops in, and so when was that? 2016 we went to that stewardship, and we put 60 acres of GS4 crops in, and by the end of that stewardship agreement, we're up to 200 acres of stewardship crops, just because we've found that they actually worked. So I had an extra 140 acres in that we were not getting paid for, but they could perform without fertilizer, and they were still growing livestock well. So that's why we made that switch onto them.
Great. We'll do the next one. If anybody else has got questions, please pop them in. Otherwise, we'll do this next one and then go on to the slides. Did you have any issues with reduced fertility in using the herbal ley?
No.
Anecdotally, they've heard of people having lower fertility rates.
Yeah, it combined with a change of breeds. We were actually actively trying to reduce the fertility rate. We were scanning about 210% with the mules, and still probably weaning about 180% and having loads of pet lambs. So actually made a real concerted effort to go away from the mule to try and reduce the fertility and prolificity of those. And there was a bit of research done in New Zealand by some farmers that found that if your red clover is grazed as part of a mixed species sward, it shouldn't affect fertility like if you graze it as a single crop. So we're quite confident when we went onto those that it shouldn't affect fertility, and it doesn't appear to. So for a few years, we culled out any mules that couldn't survive we culled out any yows that couldn't survive without feed through the winter. So we would handle them every couple of weeks, and anything that's body condition score had slipped too much, we would take off and put in a separate mob. At the end of the first year, I think we had 46 mules and one broken mouth texel in the shed. Now, that's not to suggest that mules can't cope with it, because last year the yows would be 7 years old, and we still had about 70 mules running around because they were able to survive and cope with the changing conditions. So there was no need to cull those ones out. They continued just in the flock, and they still yielded and had more lambs, as many lambs as they previously had.
Great. That's a good example of that they're kind of having stock that either suit the system or a system that suits the stock, and that it's not necessarily always going to be exactly how you kind of what you expect it to be or how you want it to be.
So there's talk about epigenetics, which is a suppressed genetic potential of stock, where you'll have some sheep that can't cope with it. So because you then feed everything, you can't find out the sheep that can and can't cope with it. So you're masking a lot of the problems, and you then breed from those sheep to come away from it. And as soon as you take that support away from them and let those genetics come to the fore, you will have sheep and cattle in every breed that can cope with the system, but because you've been feeding them to mask the problems, you're going to have a high cull rate until you get the ones that can still cope with it.
Yeah. Right. Last question I'll force on you at the moment, James, is how did you establish your GS4s?
So Warmley is a mixed farm. It has a bit of arable as well. So we had Simtech time the drill. So we did a bit with that. My farm up at Haltersill is a lot of the fields are old glacial and river beds, so they're quite stony, even though they're a bit higher than the river. So we got a direct disc drill in. I think it was a Moor drill that came and did them here, but back at my parents, we used a Simtech time drill of our own.
And were you spraying off or anything before you went in with the drill, or were you just going straight in?
We've done a bit of both. We've had most success with spraying off, but we have just grazed really hard and got it down to a level which has then knocked the roots and the regrowth of the crops. However, we do use the GS4s as part of the arable rotation down there, so they do get sprayed off and then we go in, and you do have a more successful germination with those ones if you spray off the competition.
Great. Well, thank you. That's really been really detailed stuff, and it definitely gives us a little space for some of my slides are irrelevant now. James is sticking about, so if anybody thinks of questions for him as we go through, do pop them in, and we'll go through them later if we can. It's also a great farm to visit if anybody's up in Northumberland. Him and his brother Stu are very, very welcoming to visitors. So do get in touch in that situation as well. So I'm going to go on to some of the slides that we have for today. I'm going to go through in a few sections that I mentioned at the beginning. We'll start with soils, we'll go a little bit into grazing systems, and then we'll talk a little bit about support at the end. I've broken each one down. We are talking a lot of stuff is about monitoring at home and kind of where you're starting. Fully accept every farm is different. I live 10 minutes from James and our farms are incredibly different and probably not as nice. Let's be honest, much further up the hill. So this is all about stuff that you can, it's kind of specific for your farm and you can build from there. So it is stuff that you can manage at home, that you can test and things at home where possible, to build up a system that works for you. So starting with soil structure. So one of the best ways to look at soil structure is through just visual evaluation of soil structure. Now online you can get very detailed instructions for this. You can get, there's videos on the HDB website, there's an SRUC version and stuff as well that has got quite detailed, so you can kind of take it out in the field with you as well. But just as a kind of a brief overview, what you're doing, you're going out, you're looking at the surface to start with. Is it poached? Is it obviously compacted? Is it looking quite bare? So that's kind of the first thing you're thinking about. Then you're going to take a block out, but if you cut 3 sides with your spade and then you've got one side that you kind of naturally tear, so you flip that block out. You can then look at the soil profile, and you might see some soils it'll be very obvious in some fields that if there's different layers to it. And basically what you're looking at when you're starting to look at the structure, you want to be looking at the stuff that's obviously the worst, which some stuff will be very obviously compacted. Even if the top of the soil is looking quite good, if you've got a quite compacted layer below that, it's referred to as the limiting layer, because it doesn't really matter how good the other bit is if there's a section there that's really causing a problem. So you need to sort that section first. So that's the bit that you really want to be looking at. You can look at the root depth when you're looking at that profile as well. Is everything kind of sitting at the top? Is that limiting layer stopping roots getting through? And then when you're looking at the block that you've turned out, you want to be looking at kind of the structure in terms of whether it will aggregate. If you can squish it in your hand, does it make a shape? Is it quite crumbly? So it goes through scoring crumbly, intact, firm and compact. And obviously those kind of first two, quite happy with. The firm and compact is starting to, that's starting to be more of an issue, and you need to be looking at why that's the case. One of the other things that you can do in terms of soil structure is do an infiltration test, which just gives you a bit of an idea on compaction and how well your water's going through it. Again, that's a really simple test to do at home. You just need an open-ended cylinder, and you pop that on the soil, and you're just measuring how long a certain amount of water takes to drain out of the cylinder. So you need to find a cylinder. It's not as simple as just having your spade, but it is a good indication of whether you've got compaction there and how quickly it's draining. If you find that you do have a lot of compaction, and there's various different types, there's a few things that you can do to improve it. We will discuss some of these more as we go through. But in terms of mechanical correction, if it's needed, you can do things like slitting and using aerators. You can do sward lifting, mow ploughing, and obviously shallow ploughing as well. In terms of looking at the VES, if you've done ploughing, it's too late to look at the soil structure. This is on your kind of permanent pasture that you're doing that, or your settled pasture that you're going to do the VES on. And also in terms of doing the VES, it's best to kind of spring and autumn. So you don't want the ground to be too hard either through it being quite dry in the summer or it being frozen or very wet in the winter. So you're aiming for that kind of spring or autumn in terms of looking at it. In terms of ideally, you want to be preventing soil getting compacted and the structure being damaged. So easier said than done sometimes, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. But obviously, thinking about how you're stocking your livestock on it, what machinery you're using on it, kind of tyres and stuff as well. Drainage seems to slightly to have become a bit of a bad word in terms of environmental schemes and stuff, but still quite important when you're trying to have productive pasture. But obviously well managed water. So if you are draining, thinking about where it's going and kind of the speed it's going and stuff. So if you've got space for a nice wet area somewhere on farm, you can get paid for it, hopefully, when HLS when higher tier opens again. But yeah, it does help your pasture if you can maintain your drains at least. And then incorporating deep rooting species or facilitating the ones that you've already got to do well, because we know that not everybody can add new species, and I know personally on a lot of our farm it's not something that we can do, so it's something to think about. The next kind of section of the soil stuff that I wanted to talk about was composition. So you might recognize the soil texture triangle there. A lot of you will have a good idea of what your soils are like. Some of you will have farms that are quite consistent. Some of you will have fields that vary quite a lot. Even within the field, they can vary sometimes if you get into a strip of something different. Often clays, you can have like a strip of clays, or you'll have a peaty part of upland fields. So it's just about knowing what you've got and understanding what kind of differences that makes in terms of what you can build in terms of organic matter, or how they react to certain conditions. If you're getting new ground and stuff, if you've got the opportunity to rent more ground or buy more ground, then it's always something to think about there, kind of as you're planning your management of it. The other thing in terms of composition is in terms of nutrients and your mineral composition. So a lot of that is going to be done through soil samples. So getting it sending it off to a lab and getting it tested. So that's using probably an auger to extract a sample. And often those samples will be put in as like a composite sample from across the field. So you'll take lots of different samples and send it in. So if any of you have done that, or it's something that you're thinking about doing, you'll get a report back with the results on it. This is an example from NRM, which is one of the labs that you can use. This is actually a farm that this is part of one of the field labs that we run through Native Farmers, which is about bracken control. So that control area is where there's no bracken management happening, and the treatment area is where there's management happening with livestock for the bracken. So it just gives you a little I'll just give you a little kind of talk through what some of the results mean. So they'll include a bulk density. This is a bit of an indicator for soil quality, and it also goes into the soil organic carbon calculation, which is one that will often be talked about. And it's given as the weight of soil for a given volume. So it's kind of how heavy it is, how much in there. That will also indicate kind of the different soil types and stuff will have an impact on that. The next one I was going to mention is the total carbon. You'll see on these particular set of results that the soil organic carbon and the total carbon are the same. And this is because it's an upland farm and there's no inorganic inputs going into it. But if it was a farm, if it was if there was inorganic fertilizer going on, for example, then that number would be different. Your total nitrogen, obviously a really good indicator of what's available for plant growth and stuff. You see it's lower here on the control area, and that's because that's pretty dense bracken that's going on there, where it's a bit more open. There's more of an open sward. There's more going on the treatment area. Your organic matter percentage, so that's your soil organic matter. So sometimes you'll see soil organic matter talked about, and sometimes it'll be soil organic carbon. And it's just good to know which one that's being looked at, because it obviously makes a difference to the numbers. But particularly for NRM, the calculation they use, it's 58% of your total organic matter is the soil organic carbon. So just to give you an idea of that. I know your soil organic carbon is what is often talked about in terms of how environmental factors and management can alter it. So that's what people are really looking at. So if they've changed practice, that's what you're kind of really trying to increase. And then the final one I've just got highlighted here is that tons of carbon per hectare. And again, that's more when you're looking whole farm. You can kind of give an average of the whole farm or of the whole kind of space of what you're delivering. So the last bit on soils I'm going to talk about is a little bit about health. So this first one is something, again, that you can do yourself. You can look at, get an indication of on farm. So if you are tempted to do your VEST test and look at your structure, when you've got that block of soil out, just want you to count the worms before you chuck it back in the ground. So you're probably going to break up that block anyway to get a good idea of the structure. So just as you're putting it back into the hole, just count how many worms you've got. You don't need to keep them all out like this unless you're going to struggle to remember the number, which does happen. If you get distracted, that number can shoot out of your head, being there, and you're trying to catch your worms back up again. But just count them back in, basically. And as a rough indication, more than 10 worms per block, you've got pretty healthy soils. But it's also something that obviously there's other factors that affect it, and the weather and things can affect it as well. But it just gives you a little idea of what's going on. There is other tests that can be done for microorganisms, and you can also look at root colonization and the kind of the soil, actually, even if it's got a smell, so it should smell quite earthy and pleasant. If it smells quite sulfury, then there's some issues there with aeration and stuff. If the colour of it, if it's black and things, that can give ideas of where there's problems. So there is lots of other things, but the worms is just a really simple one that you can do while you're doing the VES. In terms of building soil organic matter, there's lots of options, some of them probably already doing. Farmyard manure, so you can just spread it straight from the field or straight from the midden. You can boost the benefit you get from that by composting it. But either way, you do kind of add quite a lot of soil organic matter back to the field. Both green compost and digestate, brilliant options. Just be careful. The kind of warning on them is be careful where you get them from, particularly if you're working within standards. If you're organic, you need to know that where that's coming from. And also, yeah, just there's been a few issues with digestate and stuff, but it does provide a lot of value. And then the grazing methods, the residuals, the stocking intensity and stuff, we're going to talk about in a bit more detail how they help build. So I have a poll that I'm going to try and launch just before I go into this bit, if I can find it, which I can't at the moment. There we go. So if you can answer this poll when it pops up for you, just as we're doing this slide, I'll launch that. So this is just a little bit about soil samples. So if you just answer that and submit it, then it will disappear off your screen. So this slide here is from the Soil Association Exchange kind of protocol when that kicked off. So this is very detailed. It does look very busy. But it just gives you an idea of how you can structure, if you are interested in doing some sampling and stuff, if you are going to look at it, how you can just go into one field and get everything done in one go. So if you walk a W pattern, it gives you a good variation right across the field. So that's a good place to start. Avoid edges, gateways, kind of round water troughs and stuff, because they're going to give you a kind of unbalance to your sample. One of the good ways to do it, if you're doing a W, if you count between steps, if you can decide you're going to do a certain amount of steps, it might need to alter a little bit, but it means that you're focusing on the number of steps rather than picking bits of ground. So kind of even if it's just on the arm, kind of in each direction, you do a certain amount of steps and then do your sampling. So the crosses on here, the little blue crosses, and also the yellow dots are about when you're doing that soil auger. So you could do quite one. You want to do a minimum of 10 basically across a field, but if you're doing more than that, that's fine. The red and the green is for doing your vests and your earthworms. 5's a bit excessive. Kind of, you probably can get away with doing 3 and it not being a problem. And yeah, three of them should give you a good idea of it. This one also includes as hedgerow sampling. That's part of the Soil Association Exchange stuff. But if you have got hedgerows, if you're interested, there is a really good app that helps you kind of score your hedgerows of how they're managed and stuff and give you an idea of that. So if it's something that you're building, then that's something that you can do as well. So just before I go on, I hope everybody's had a go at the poll. And we're going to view the results. Got a few. So share those. Where do they share? Oh, it's coming up on a different screen, is it? Oh, it is. Oh, dear me. Right, I'm going to stop sharing that. Don't know why that's happened at all. It's not what I wanted it to do. Have the results come up in the chat, Kate?
No, they did
No.
briefly pop up in your screen, but we got to see them when we voted.
Okay, so I'll just run through them a little bit. So thankfully, nobody has said that their soil monitoring is non-existent and it's staying that way.
Everyone's doing something.
But everybody's doing something that's good. Quite a lot of people, the majority are sampling for the SFI soil plan, but are going to build up from there. The next biggest number, which is really nice, is 28% of people have a very close relationship with their soils to the point that their dog is envious. So that's good. That's what I like to hear. So thank you for that, for those responses. I will share the presentation again. So it's disappeared. Trying to click the wrong buttons. And jump back to where we were. Great. So we're going to go on to grazing. I'll just check the chat. Did we have questions there that people wanted answers to? Oh, the responses are in the chat. That helps. Anybody? Celine just sharing about the soil health
just
scorecard.
questioning about and about our worm numbers, what good looks like. But I guess, I think if you're looking 10 to 15, even in grasslands consistently, I think that's still pretty good going.
Yeah. And there's a link there that Celine's shared as well. There is tons of really good resources everywhere, but the HDB website has the videos and stuff as well, which is quite handy. If you don't want to just read the instructions, depends how you want to absorb information. So I'll go on to our grazing systems. So what I wanted to start with again is monitoring. And basically, it just gives a really good opportunity. It helps with planning, but it also helps just with sense checking your knowledge. A lot of you will have a good idea of how productive certain fields are, how long animals can be on the fields, you might have restrictions from environmental schemes and stuff about what your stocking rate has to be. But really, we want to be, particularly with growing young stock and things, we want to be pretty consistent. We want a consistent kind of bite ahead of them. And in the same way as with growth rate, kind of they've already started dipping before we can see it. They've started on the downward and then we're having to pull them back up again. It's similar with the grazing. Kind of if we can see that we're running short on grass, we've kind of already dropped off a little bit too far and we want to be pulling back up the other way. So if you're monitoring, however that is, and you can match it up with, there's like Grass Check GB, which is on here, but there's various tools, including like weather mapping and stuff, that will give you a good idea of what's coming. But if you can kind of just keep that so that you're keeping stuff ahead of them, and obviously you're kind of what's available to you on the farm and stuff will dictate that and that stocking rate. But really that's what we're aiming to do, is to keep it in front of them so they don't kind of start that dip. Lots of ways to do it. Cheap and cheerful with a sword stick. If you've got a plate meter, or if you wanted to buy a plate meter, there is that option too. There's stuff that works alongside that, like Grass Check GB. There is more fancier tools that do all sorts of sensors and modeling and LiDAR and radar and whatever it is, if you're really getting into it. But basically the start point is that sword stick. You can get them free. HDB, QMS, if you go on the Barenberg website, you can just order one, you just fill in a form. There's variations on them. So originally all the sword sticks were very much for kind of ryegrass reseeds, basically. Whereas now there is versions available for a more mixed sward. There's versions available for a very clover heavy sward and stuff as well. So think about that when you're picking them, what suits your system best. But really that becomes very important when you're starting to look at the dry matter content. So if you're going to that level of worrying, knowing how much dry matter that you need in front of your livestock, then you need to be using the right sword stick, and some of the other plate meters and the sensors and stuff might be more your bag. If you're just trying to kind of, if you're thinking about your residuals and stuff like that, then just a bog standard sword stick does the job, as long as you know what you're aiming for. If you haven't used one before, again, just go out in the field. You can do it in your same place as your soil samples, so you can do a W in the same way. A clipboard or like a lightweight catalogue or magazine or something, just to compress the sward a little bit, and then you put your stick up against it. You've got the bottom of it sitting on top of the soil there, and you're just measuring up to that kind of compressed height. And again, doing multiple across the field. So next bit, I'm sorry, I haven't kept an eye on questions. Kate, are you going to shout at me if there's pressing questions?
I am. I'm just helping with audio problems. It's fine. Yeah.
That's okay. Good stuff. So the next bit in terms of your grazing system is equipment. And some of this, again, very, very obvious stuff. But in cases of if you're wanting to make changes, thinking about your fencing, what type of fencing do you need to do? Are you going to add permanent fencing? Or actually, do you just need some temporary fencing that you can move around? And what's that going to be? How are you going to power it? The same with water. Do you need to put more permanent water in, or do you need water that you can move around? The Farming Equipment and Technology Fund reopens on the 29th of May. You've got 6 weeks to apply for that. That includes lots of, it's got water bowsers and stuff on that. So in terms of water, you can get water bowsers with troughs attached to them, or you can get portable troughs. So again, if you're thinking about changing your grazing system and going to kind of reducing paddock sizes, then that could be really useful. But also the bowser stuff really useful if you're grazing on quite extensive systems, maybe a bit further away from home, or you want to keep them out on that sort of grazing for longer, whether that's in the summer or in the winter. Having extra water can be really beneficial and gives you a bit more options, even if you want to break up rougher grazing, not to tiny paddocks, but break it up a little bit, then having that sort of thing is very beneficial. I've got equipment, I've got shade and shelter down as equipment. It's not really equipment, but in terms of infrastructure stuff, there's lots of opportunities through like agroforestry systems. So you can still apply for agroforestry and PA4s and make plans that way. And that links in with fencing and stuff as well, I suppose. But whether you want to put trees or hedges in to build up your shade and shelter or kind of support those boundaries and stuff, then it's something to think about, particularly if you're wanting to split fields up more. Kind of how far away from shade and shelter is that going to leave your livestock, and how quickly can you get them back to it if you need to? So if it's particularly hot, or if it's particularly kind of any weather extremes, how can you get there? I've got collars on here for some systems, kind of particularly extensive systems up on the hill and stuff. Collars can be quite useful, depending on how you want to use them. I've got an example on, just pop to the next slide. The example on this slide, this is at Geltsdale, which is local to James and myself, which is an RSPB estate. And they were using sheep collars to protect wading ground nesting bird nests. But you can use it in lots of different ways, but you can kind of heft an unhefted flock with it. You can keep them away from footpaths or nesting sites or species of interest in terms of grazing, or you can use it to kind of put new boundaries in without actually having to put the boundaries in. I think there's varying success. We use them on cattle a bit here, to keep them away from nests particularly, but also to kind of allow grazing a little bit for the calves. We had a bit of issue with battery or kind of collars disconnecting, but they have made improvements since then, and there's been, I think some people get on really well with them, so it's just about matching them to your system. That's actually pictures demonstrating some of the water trough options. So there's permanent ones in the background of that top left picture, and in that middle top picture, that's one of the portable ones. And again, examples of fencing and stuff. I think James mentioned that they're using solar for their electric fence, which obviously makes it very portable, but maybe less strength. So it depends how keen your sheep are to be trained behind wires, makes a big difference. So the other equipment that kind of worth mentioning if you're planning on changing the grazing system or to make more of your grazing systems, sheep handling. So that's either putting permanent handling in or having something portable. There's tons of options now for the portable stuff. So there used to literally only be like the Pratley and the alligator, but there is loads of options now. You can get them secondhand. You can also, again, pay for, you get 50% off them with the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund. So lots of things to look at there. Makes things easier, because if you're getting more production out of your grass, if you're getting more from your grassland, then actually having a handling system where then you can get them in on the spot where they are. You can maybe make weaning decisions quicker, or be on top of treatments and stuff. There's weigh equipment available within that fund as well, so you can add scales and stuff on there. So whether it's you might be drawing lambs and drawing more often, kind of improve cash flow over the summer, getting everything as you need it. So lots of options there. I've got fly traps on here. particularly if you're using, it works well with the water bowsers if you're using portable water, but also if you're increasing your stocking density by putting them on smaller areas, using lots of temporary fencing and stuff. Just adding some fly traps onto those boundaries or onto your water bowser and stuff. I wouldn't say they were a complete silver bullet, but anything that reduces fly numbers, particularly if you're in a strike sort of risk area, then that can be beneficial. And the final one I've got in terms of animal health stuff is either having a fecal egg sampling kit from your vet or your animal health distributor, which is literally just like the bags and stuff to put the samples in and take back to them, or whether you've got a microscope of some sort yourself so that you can do it at home. Keeping on top of the roundworms is particularly important when you're rotations. So the rotations that James is talking about, where they've got big long rests, absolutely fine. That's not going to be a problem. If your rotation is too short, kind of that original 21 days, your sheep are getting back onto that field just where any parasite eggs are kind of hatching again, which is not what you want. So that kind of timing is important. Obviously, doing fecal egg counts is the best practice in terms of any treatment for parasites as well. So knowing what whether you need to treat and what you're treating. And it also gives you an idea, it gives a really good indicator of the level of contamination on the pasture as well. So you can then make decisions about stocking. Do you need to put an older group of animals over to clean it up a bit? Do you need to put a different stock class on completely? So do you want to put a group of cows round or heifers or whatever it is round after the sheep, which has a dual benefit if they deal with the parasites, but actually any longer stuff that's got a bit woody or has gone beyond the sheep a little bit, they can clean that up as well. And then it can have a nice long rest before you put anything back in. So just supports those changes in the system. I think talked through most of those pictures, just your classic Pratley hurdles there. So I'm going to hand over to Kate, because I think you've probably all listened to me for quite long enough, to talk about species of interest.
Thank you, Tabitha. And yeah, hello everyone. I appreciate James has said a lot of some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in a much better way than I can, because it's obviously very practically from what he's been practicing on his farm. I just want to pick up on a few more bits around the different species of interest. And I think something that we were really keen to get across on our webinar this evening was that focus on permanent pasture, as much as, you know, lots of people obviously are taking advantage and implementing these sort of more diverse herbal lays, these new sown pastures in terms of diversity, particularly under either the old GS4 or under the new SFI, the CSAM 3, obviously really good payment level for that. So lots of people have implemented these new lays, but particularly in kind of upland situations or in huge amounts of situations across the UK, sowing new lays isn't an option. So what we want to really get across is how people can, you know, make the most of their existing permanent pasture, whether that's just in how they're grazing it in order to maximize the species of interest that are existing in the sward and trying to encourage certain herbs or legumes to, you know, spread more abundantly across that sward, or where there is the potential to do overseeding and you'll introduce new species just to try and enrich those swards. So yeah, the focus is not just on sowing these new lays, but really trying to think about how you can improve the existing lays that you've got, or existing pastures that you've got. But just to say a few things quickly around some of these, you know, some of the different groups. Again, obviously James sort of mentioned some of them earlier. You obviously got your fertility building legumes, and they're going to be a combination of sort of clovers, Burfoot trefoil, and other options depending on your soil type. See, you know, plants like lucerne and sainfoin can be incredibly valuable because they're very deep rooting and a legume, but obviously only really very persistent on chalky soils. There's a whole load of different herbs that will also, you know, provide this real drought resilience that we're finding to be more and more important. I was a farm yesterday, and now resilience is like his main focus in terms of the types of plants that he's growing, whether that's, well, a combination of drought in the summer, then obviously being able to stand up against high rainfall in the winter. So introducing a lot of these new deep rooting plants, or trying to maximize them in the existing sward. I can't believe, you know, a lot of you are going to have things like yarrow and burnet and plantain in your existing permanent pastures. So it's really trying to think about how you can perhaps be adjusting your grazing approaches to maximize those species. As Tabitha mentioned, you know, obviously a lot of these rotational grazing approaches have real benefits in terms of worm control, but then, you know, we're learning more and more about some of the anthelmintic properties of some of these species, chicory, sainfoin, bursfoot trefoil, largely down to the amount of tannins in them that enable them to interrupt the worm cycle. So, you know, there's a lot of benefit there, but I think probably the clean grazing approach outcompetes some of the anthelmintic properties of some of those plants, but they do have that added benefit. And I think lastly, just to highlight around sort of high mineral content, it's really around a lot of our organic farmers, particularly because some of the available boluses and ways to correct mineral deficiencies are having a big impact on sort of deficiency problems. And a lot of these diverse herbs do have high mineral content, and there's some really good work that's come out of Rothamsted really highlighting this. So I think it's looking at how you can kind of correct some of the mineral content where you can. So next slide. So yeah, very quickly, everyone's loving the Cotswold seeds illustrations that we've all been robbing from them, but they are so valuable at demonstrating this, you know, variability in rooting depth that you're getting from a lot of these plants, and that where a lot of these benefits are coming from, whether that's those roots going down to break up compaction, whether it's about them going down to draw up more moisture and minerals from the soil, the fact that, you know, all of that deep rooting species are going to be adding soil organic matter, getting those deep rooting species in there is really, really valuable. And so from a grasses point of view, it's about really balancing off palatability, sort of energy use and resilience across those different species. Because obviously the ryegrass is highly palatable and, you know, hugely valuable early in the season, but has that shallow rooting depth that obviously James was talking about. Whereas, you know, coxsfoot obviously has very deep roots and is really persistent, but, you know, it sort of reduces in palatability, particularly as it gets much taller. So being able to kind of manage your grazing really effectively to get that balance right between palatability and resilience is key. But some of these other species, those fescues, tall fescue, I know has been really valuable in people who are practicing sort of outwintering, because it stands up very well if you're doing quite a sort of long deferred grazing where you've got particularly cattle or sheep going out over winter, and enable you to protect the soil, because it'll stand up against that kind of trampling effect, enabling you to do sort of bale grazing, all of these things. So it's trying to think about what you want out of the species if you're introducing them, and then thinking about what grasses you've got in your existing sward and how you might be wanting to maximize them through your grazing approaches. Next one, Tabitha. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a huge amount more to say about some of these legumes. Again, you know, I think people are quite understand well about the real deep rooting properties of things like lucerne and sainfoin, but they are quite limiting in terms of the types of soil that they are persistent on. However, this farm I happened to be at yesterday, who does have a lot of sainfoin in his swards, and they do have a, you know, big variability of chalk and more clay soils across the farm. And he was just saying how, as he's improved the soil organic matter and improved the soil health generally in his clay soils, then some of these other species are sort of persisting more. So I think there's a lot to be said in terms of a healthy soil can be suited to a lot more species rather than just soil type. So as his soils have improved, he's found more of these sort of more sensitive, I guess, legumes and herbs have persisted far better as he's increased soil biology, improved soil organic matter, increased that aeration and drainage within his soils. So it was quite interesting. But you'll see from the little notes that have been put onto the slide, generally the focus with these legumes is this taller residual, making sure you're not overgrazing. You really want to graze down to a maximum of sort of, and it says there 4 centimeters over winter, but I think 7 centimeters really has been seen to be the optimum to try and prevent this damage to these all these different delicate legumes that will really not enjoy being overgrazed. And sheep, obviously, as James mentioned, really like to pick out some of these tastier plants. Next one, Tabitha. And yeah, just to comment again on the forage herbs. So again, you've got this sort of focus around protecting the crown and making sure that they're persistent, long going, because often, particularly in some of these newly sown swards, you'll see they become very dominant in plants like chicory and plantain, but then they reduce quite significantly as years go by. And I think James mentioned he had the same effect when he was overgrazing his initially. So you really do want to focus on having these much taller residuals and going in at much higher covers in order to really get sort of persistence in a lot of these species, and that needs to be the focus. If you've got these plants already in your permanent pasture, it's really trying to think about how you can implement rotations around your farm that are going to enable you to let stuff just grow much taller, so that it has more chance to set seed, more chance to get to a much more larger, vigorous plant that it can then recover well from being grazed, a bit like James was saying with that damage to root growth. If you overgraze, it then takes so much energy of that plant to regrow itself and then regrow the roots. You really do want to sort of prevent this kind of overgrazing, which sometimes in our permanent pasture systems we can fall foul of. Next one. So we were just wanting to highlight here a little bit, after talking about some of the nice species that we obviously want to persist in our swards, and how the benefits of those, is also then trying to look a little bit about some of the what you would call weed species or less favorable species within your swards, and what they might be telling you about your soil. And I think this is becoming more and more a useful tool, particularly in a lot of arable farmers are using some of the weeds they've got to think about, particularly kind of nutrient deficiencies that they might have. But I think certainly in permanent pasture, both looking at nutrients, for example, dandelions, demonstrate low calcium levels, but they're also obviously a good indication of compaction. Same with like thistles and docks. Obviously, they demonstrate that the soil is compacted and you've really got that lack of aeration in the soil. And often you've got potentially high waterlogging in the soil as well. Same creeping buttercup will be a high sign of waterlogged soil compaction. pH levels aren't favourable. So it's really thinking about when you're going through all of those different practices that Tabitha was mentioning around soil health, then using what other indicators can you look at in your sward, what species are growing, what are they telling you about how your soil is faring, and what actions you might need to take to improve that in order to reduce those unfavourable species, which will then obviously give more space to allow some of the different herbs and legumes that you've got in the sward to come through. Next slide, please.
Right, I'll just pop another poll in now while we're talking about the kind of go on to examples of different systems. And this is just to get an idea of the type of grazing system that you're working with. So it should pop up for you, or it'll be in the chat.
We've got it this time in the chat. It's coming in the chat this time.
Got both.
Nice. Got it all happening.
So have a little click on that. You can click more than one. So just to give us an idea of what type of grazing system you're currently using. Thank you. And then Kate, did you want to keep going with what these are? Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, no, sure. So in terms of what each of them are, and
yeah, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'd imagine a lot of you are very familiar, but obviously extensive systems tend to be focused more on natural grasslands and moorland, shrubland that have got a a naturally occurring plant population and will generally be stocked quite low stocking rates. The more intensive type is really around largely ryegrass focused sown swards where you've again got high stocking rates, but you're really focusing on different sward that's going to maximize energy use. Mob grazing, cell grazing, all of these different rotational systems we were going to look at in a little bit more detail in a minute, but largely it's about this sort of high intensity, high stocking rates for short periods, but then really focusing on that rest period. So it's that combination of high residuals going in, higher residuals going out, but really focusing on getting a lot of animals in there very quickly to get a uniform graze. Similarly with strip grazing, obviously you're just doing that, so you're working your way through a pasture, making sure you've got high stocking rate for shorter periods of time so that they're grazing in a uniform fashion. Deferred grazing is a term that's used more and more, particularly looking at kind of bale grazing and outwintering, but largely is around building up these really tall residuals and either then going in with a mob and just treating it to enable that eat a third, trample a third, leave a third sort of approach, so that you can sort of optimize the amount of forage that's then being trampled back into the soil, or you're using it in a way that you're trying to protect the soil through outwintering if you've got bale grazing and you really need that kind of wedge of forage to protect the soil from any kind of damage of trampling. And creep. What was creep, Tabitha?
Oh, creep is just, it kind of fits in with the kind of mob cell rotational or strip grazing sort of thing, but it's
nice.
just it's letting the kind of the young stock that are still grazing with their mothers, but let them get ahead just to kind of that fresh bite a little bit. So if anybody still wants to do the poll, they can. Currently, we are equal on extensive grazing and mob cell rotational. So either end. But hopefully kind of we're covering a bit of both. There's been stuff for both in there. And I think the stuff that we're going to go on to next and some of the benefits, it can be applied to a certain extent within an extensive system as well. So just because you're running over quite natural grasslands and stuff doesn't mean that it has to be grazed in a set stocked manner. So you can start either moving things a bit more or restricting where they can get to and stuff with it kind of, sorry, I got distracted by the chat there and lost my words. Yeah, you can still do some of the management that we're talking about and stuff, and there's still options available over those kind of big natural grasslands as well. It doesn't need to be set stocked. So I'm very aware that with that result, this next slide's pretty intense. And we're not saying that everybody has to do this, and that there is definite levels to do it. So don't just look at the picture and think, oh my God, that's ridiculous. But we'll talk about it a little bit more now.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, because I guess the focus is, and as James was saying, as we've been saying throughout, is this need to protect your sward to allow it to regrow. And so rotational grazing approaches have really demonstrated that you can get really high productivity, good growth rates and good soil outcomes if you go to a more rotationally grazed approach. I think I don't know, I was looking at some research that has been done in Wales, and they were looking at sort of rotationally grazed pasture compared with set stocks. The rotationally grazed was 8.3% soil organic matter compared with 6.9% with set stocked. And I know all sorts of work that's come out of the Reading grazing rotational grazing project and stuff coming out of Rothamsted has all highlighted how rotational grazing has sort of increased soil organic matter levels. But I think what Tabitha's saying, and what we're really trying to say, is that it doesn't need to be down to that really intensive cell grazing or Hubble spoke, sort of approach that is illustrated in some of these little drawings. They all focus on the fact that you're moving groups of animals around a system and doing that in quite quick succession, but allowing long recovery periods and allowing quite high covers when you're going in. And I think where we wanted to really highlight is that that can be done at quite a extensive approach still. So even if you're starting to split some of your fields just in 2 or into quarters, so that you can allow a more focused grazing approach and a more focused recovery approach, that's a really good place to start. And whether you've got the time or the resources to move to kind of everyday moves or twice a day moves, then it's really okay to be quite flexible in your approach. And I think what also is really key is when you've got a system that you can change things. So you can potentially be going in at certain times of the year with far quicker moves and, you know, much tighter rotation, but then in other times of the year when you just don't have the time and resource available, then you can be going to, you know, moving them twice every 2 days, every 3 days, every 5 days. But the fact is that you're still allowing more uniform graze, not allowing overgrazing, and then getting them off onto fresh ground so that you've got all of those other health benefits of moving them into clean ground and also getting that fresh bite each time, which obviously helps with productivity.
Sorry, Kate, but just to rudely interrupt you on this one.
Yeah, please do.
I do have a friend that's doing rotational grazing, but he doesn't use electric fences. He just has a mob of 1,500 ewes and lambs, and he'll put them in an 8-acre field, graze it off, and then move them to a 20-acre field. And some of the rotations, they'll be set stocked for 4 days in the field, and then in a larger field, they may be there for 10 or 12 days. But he's rotationally grazing without using any fences. He's just got that larger farm and that much stock. He's able to do it on a field-by-field basis.
Perfect. That's a perfect example of what we're just, of what is available, what can be available to you. You just need to have the mindset that you're moving animals when you realize that you're grazing is at a level that you know are going to start damaging the sward that you've got in front of you. So yeah, having to do it on a, you know, much smaller approach in terms of strips or in terms of cells can obviously be very big cells if you've got them into a paddock situation.
Kate, I'm going to whiz us on a little bit.
I know, I appreciate we're really tight on our time.
Stupidly saying that we would have loads of time.
Yeah.
We've run out of time. So I think we've mentioned a lot of the kind of productivity and animal health bits on here. James obviously talked about really like the benefits from terms of body condition score and stuff at the beginning. So that's really, really helpful. If anybody's got questions specifically about those, please do shout. I just want you to move on. This is our second last slide, so we're not too bad, but just a little bit about support. Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff in the news and things at the moment, and it's particularly stressful, irritating time for farmers and advisors alike, trying to maneuver through all of this. But just things that we this is information that we do know and some stuff that is actually available. I've mentioned the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund. There was a blog from DEFRA put out about that today with some more details. Key stuff is it opens on the 29th of May, and there is a 6-week application window, and it is competitive. They score your application, and how much money or whatever is based on that, because they're very keen for value for money. So have a think over the next couple of weeks if there's stuff that you want, and get your application in, and try and think about what's really going to be beneficial, sort of thing. So it's worth doing. Most of it comes out at about 50% of what they expect the price of something to be. So it's not everything, but if there's stuff that you're going to use and that fits in with your system and stuff, it's worth getting the money off. There's not much extra information about the Farming Innovation Programme yet. In terms of accelerating development of practices and technology fund, the Adopt Fund, such a mouthful. So that's about big on-farm research projects. So if any of you are aware of Innovative Farmers, which is like little on-farm research projects, which is still going, this is like the big grown-up version of that, with big pots of money. You can start applying for that now. Go through the system. There is an innovation support hub, which part of our team is part of, to help guide people through that application process. And you also need as part of the application process and part of the application, you need a facilitator. So there's a list of people available, or you can put one of your own facilitators forward if you want to do that. But it's all about collaborative approaches. So, but if there's something innovative that you want to test on farm, there's a group of you that want to test it, definitely consider that. The animal health and welfare pathway is still open. Take advantage of it if you haven't already. It's with your vet, but it pays for their visits and for follow-ups and stuff. So doing a really good animal health program on farm, and there's endemic disease stuff as well. Apologies for those of you that this support bit is England focused. This, I haven't included other stuff, but if you've got any specific questions, we can support on that afterwards. For those of you that are in protected landscapes, that's the farming protected landscapes is open again. They extended it to March 26th. That most of them are open for applications now. So if you either want to get more from that, if you've done it before, or if you never got a chance before, do look at that, because that has quite a lot of options, and can give you an opportunity to do a bit more of a kind of, if you've got a bigger picture sort of idea that you want to do that includes lots of little bits that you could get through other things, then you can kind of do it all together, particularly when capital grants aren't available at the moment. They use the same pricing structure normally, but you can get it done through FIPL if it's part of more stuff. In terms of more traditional stewardship stuff, obviously, as everybody will be aware, SFI got quite abruptly stopped. The messaging on that is a little unclear, but it's very unlikely that it'll open again before summer 2026. The funding that the kind of pot of money that they had assigned to SFI, they've spent the 24-25 budget and the 25-26 budget, which takes us to kind of this time, April, May next year, before that's likely to come out again. And we don't think it'll be the same actions as there has been available. So that's a bit of a, they're planning lots of reviews and stuff. So there's a lot of actions that either weren't taken up or weren't taken up how they expected them to be used. So I think that's going to change how it looks by the time it does reopen. In terms of countryside stewardship higher tier, they're still saying later this year that rollout's going to happen. People are being invited for the pre-application advice stage, and they'll be the first ones that get to actually apply. But again, yeah, later this year is what we've got. Capital grants apparently reopening this summer. Again, not very specific, but hopefully they will become an option again. Both the kind of comment with both of those is do any planning now. If you've got your planning done, whether that's through PA2s, PA4s, whatever it is, that puts you in a much better position. So it means you know what you want. If you can get funding for it when the funding comes available, great. But it means you've got a plan either way.